Former Trump advisor Steve Bannon once again refuses to appear before the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th Capitol insurrection. Bannon's lawyer sent a letter to lawmakers late yesterday. He said his client will not cooperate until the committee reaches an agreement with former President Trump over executive privileges or a court weighs in on the matter. The former White House chief strategist was originally set to be deposed today, alongside former Defense Department official Kash Patel. Reports say Patel has been cooperating with the investigation, but it is unclear if he will show up to testify. So, joining us now to discuss, New York Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney. Thank you so much for being with us, Congresswoman.
Thank you for having me.
So, for folks who may not understand what executive privilege is and what it is not, explain to the viewers, our viewers, what that means and what your thoughts are on Steve Bannon's legal team citing executive privilege as his continued refusal to appear before the January 6th committee.
Well, he clearly doesn't want to appear before the January 6th committee, and he's using every excuse he can find to stall it, delay it, and try to stop it. Government should be transparent. He should testify about his role, and that's his responsibility. Most people respond to congressional requests for oversight, and he's dodging it. There are certain items of executive privilege when there are conversations of national security, of other interests of the government that should not be made public, then they have executive clearance or executive privilege to be treated differently than other people. But in our country, no one is above the law, including the President of the United States. We're a government by the people, for the people, and that's what January 6th is trying to look at. I never thought I would see something like January 6th in the United States of America. You expect that in Cuba or some other country, but not in the United States of America. It was horrifying to see people storm the Capitol, get into the Capitol, literally stop the proceedings of a just and fair and legal election stopped. They tried to find the ballot boxes to try to destroy the evidence of the fair election. It was horrifying beyond belief. Our many foreign governments tell me that what they most respect about America is the peaceful transfer of power. Few countries have that in the world, but America has always had that. And there was an attempted coup on January 6th.
You know, Representative, we've seen allies of the former president completely ignore requests from committees like this and even subpoenas. And so, you know, in light of what you just said about what happened on January 6th, do you think it's about time that we see these committees be more aggressive when it comes to compelling people to present themselves and testify?
Well, absolutely. And I'm sure that the committee will be very aggressive. And if they fail to comply, then they can attack them for ignoring Congress. They can bring court actions against them. They can fine them. There are other steps that they can take, and I think they will take them if they don't comply.
Congresswoman, you know, back in May, Representative Andrew Clyde, Republican of Georgia, likened the images that we were just showing on our screen there. He called it an undisciplined mob, and there were some rioters and some who committed acts of vandalism, but no insurrection. He likened it to a normal tourist visit. And my question is, when you talk to your colleagues in private, when they say these things publicly, do they say the very same things to you? And I know you don't want to share private conversations, but I wonder, when you see the images that we're showing here and we see the images that we saw of Representative Clyde on that day during that insurrection, why he would say publicly that he was likening what we saw there to tourists.
Well, facts don't lie. And what you saw and what you showed the American people is the facts of what really happened on January 6th. It was a storming of the Capitol. And Mr. Clyde or any Republican can call it a slight tour of the Capitol. But we have evidence of the president himself calling the Department of Justice and trying to get them to say that the election was a fraud, and they would say there's no proof. This was in real handwriting from people were taking notes when the president himself was calling Justice Department officials. It's just outrageous what happened. And we call it the big lie. They're trying to say that the election is stolen. It was not stolen. And I don't know what you say to Republicans, some Republicans, when all the evidence is in front of them and they refuse to believe it. We just had recently a hearing on Cyber Ninja, which was the audit in Arizona. The Republicans called for an audit and said that the election was stolen in Arizona. So we decided we would take a look at it. So we went in, meaning the committee that I chair, the Oversight Committee, and we reviewed everything. We found that they raised $7 million from dark sources, usually very far right Republican sources. They conducted an audit, and they did not find any proof of a stolen election or election faults or anything like that. We even had two solid Republican election officials testify before the committee that said it was a fair, just, good election, one of the best that they've ever conducted. They were supporters of Mr. Trump, but they voted for Mr. Trump, but they said their election showed that President Biden won that election and that it was a fair election, a well-done election. There was no proof of fraud. And then right after that, I couldn't believe it. I had Mr. Gosar and Mr. Biggs sit on the panel and say that it was a stolen election. So when all the facts are there, including from Republican officials, and they still say that it was a stolen election, I don't know how to handle that. It's just someone who's not confronting reality or wanting to put forward to the American people a false statement. It's and the same thing with January 6th. To call that a picnic, a tour of the Capitol, people's lives were at stake. They were saying they wanted to kill Vice President Pence and Nancy Pelosi. It was life-threatening. It was an attempted coup. It was a storming of the United States Capitol. It was the darkest day in the history of America. And it has shattered the strong record that we have always had of a peaceful transfer of elections, a respect for elections, and honoring elections.
Congresswoman, I want to talk a little bit more about that hearing into the Cyber Ninja audit. We ran that live here on CBSN, so Vlad and I were watching a good chunk of it. And we knew, first off, no one from Cyber Ninja showed up. Obviously, the audit confirmed the outcome of the election. And then later on, we found out about all sorts of irregularities when it came to Cyber Ninja and what they did and mistakes that they may have made. But one of the questions that I did ask myself is, here we are listening to arguments over whether or not this election was stolen. Again, it felt like we were going back in time. And a part of me wondered whether the public, the viewers, were benefiting from this, because it brings up these arguments that, quite frankly, make people feel less confident about the election. Why do you think that hearing was necessary?
I think the hearing was necessary because the Republicans were claiming that President Trump won the election in Arizona. Now, if you don't prove them false, then that storyline is out there. And you have to get to the facts. That's why we had the hearing and did a review of everything. And that's why it came out, even with Republican leaders and election officials saying it was a fair and good election. So that shows that the big lie is a big lie. If you don't confront it with the facts, then the big lie will continue. And as I understand it, it's been reported by the press that apparently the president had a big rally in Iowa recently, where again, even with the proof of the audit coming out that Vice President Biden won the election and is now President Biden, they were still saying that Trump won the election. So I think that if there's a lie out there, you have to confront it and get to the facts. Anyone who reads the facts of this committee hearing will see that President Biden won the Arizona audit. Democrats don't want to talk about this. We would prefer to go out and pass our infrastructure bill and our Build Back Better bill, which we are going to do to help the American people. But at the same time, you can't if you let the lie out there, then that sows more belief that maybe our elections aren't fair, then other people may not vote or whatever. It's very, very important that you get the facts out there and the truth out there.
Representative, the former president's unproven claims have certainly raised concerns for some about the integrity of our elections, as we've been discussing. But I want to ask you a question about your position back in 2007 when you yourself appeared critical of our electronic voting system and the security and accuracy of voting machines that were used back in 2007. And this had to do with Sequoia. But you mentioned this. I'm relieved by the news of the sale when Smartmatic announced the sale of Sequoia voting systems. Here's what you said. The integrity of our voting machines and elections is vital to national security. Given all the past uncertainty and anxiety surrounding electronic voting, it's nice that the voters will have this added reassurance when they enter the voting booth. Explain why your position then was that there are some people who are concerned about our voting and because of the use of electronic machines and what's changed now. And I know there were some particular circumstances with Sequoia specifically.
Well, with Sequoia, there was no question that Sequoia was owned by the Venezuelan government. They sold the machines to, I think it was Chicago. This was a long time ago. And when they broke down, no one could repair them. They had to bring technicians over from Venezuela to take care of the machines. And then also, their headquarters, they said, was in a particular building in Florida. And at that time, we went to the building where their headquarters were. And the headquarters of, quote, Sequoia back then, or the voting machine company that I questioned their activities in America, it was a janitor's closet. So that was the headquarters of Sequoia. So there were a lot of questions about that particular voting machine, Sequoia, and they continued to be there. I questioned that particular item. But on these voting machines, when they have investigated them, they have not found flaws or misuse or showed any violation. If they have that proof, then they should bring it to the American people and bring it to me and everyone else, and we'll look at it.
And finally, Congresswoman, this week, let's talk about closer to home here in New York. You toured Rikers Island, the jail complex, alongside New York Representatives Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Richie Torres. How would you describe the current state of the facility?
Well, it is a facility in crisis, not only for the inmates, but also for the correction officers. They need more assistance. They need more help. I applaud the steps that the governor and the mayor have taken to have low-level crimes or parole crimes or whatever, have those people released. They are moving the women to the other state facilities, so that should open up more area and relieve more staff. They have a staffing crisis there. We need to have a federal, state, and city view on this crisis. There is a plan to close down Rikers by 2027, which I support, but in the meantime, they need more resources and they need help for the inmates. They're only they claim that they're not getting enough food, enough water. The sanitation area is a problem. When we were there, they had cleaned up a lot of things that my colleagues were telling me that they saw feces on the ground and just really a disastrous sanitation situation. When we were there, we did not see that. But on the other hand, it was overcrowded. They were in certain areas, they would put toothpaste on the locks so that the lock wouldn't work. So therefore, the correction officers were on a ward where prisoners were not even locked in their cells. They could get out. So that put a concern there. As a former teacher, I was very concerned about classes and programming, which I did not see. I think we should have alternative areas where they can work to get a college or high school education and other positive things. I think that we will be going back in for more review. Also of deep concern is that many of the inmates were telling me that they had been there a year, 2 years, and had not even been charged with a crime. This is outrageous to me. They shouldn't be held in prison if they're not even charged. But the prison officials were saying that the courts are so slow that they aren't processing any of this. They'll have one a day, maybe two a day. They have over 5,000 people there. And people are being held when they haven't even been they haven't been convicted of a crime. So that really needs to be looked at for alternative incarceration. People should not be kept in prison for 2 years, allegedly, or a year, allegedly, and they haven't even been convicted. So this process needs a lot more review. We're beginning an investigation, and we'll continue one, and we will keep you informed. Since our visit on Tuesday, we were there on Tuesday, and our reports back to the mayor and the governor have agreed to close down the women's facility and to move the women to Bedford, which has high marks as a women's penitentiary, and other state facilities that would then open up more space and more personnel for the remaining residents. Others that were on parole violations were released, and we're trying to get the number of people in prison down. If we can find people who are not a risk and are being held there when they should not be, then have them released, and then relieving the women and moving them to better facilities and other state facilities. That's one positive step that took effect by the governor and the mayor yesterday.
Well, it's good to hear that there are some changes being made, because those conditions that you described sound absolutely horrible. Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney, thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for shedding a light on it. 12 people have died in this past year, and 5 are suspected suicides. So that is proof enough that it is a crisis situation that needs to be addressed. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Indeed.